The following podcast is going to contain spoilers, along with me, just a regular guy, talking about all the things I love, such as comics, movies, television, music, and books. So yeah, proceed at your own risk. Welcome to another episode of Just Another Fanboy. I'm your host, Steven, and today I want to talk about podcasts. Not my podcast. I'm not going to talk about my podcast, the most stellar podcast in all the world. No, today I want to talk about podcasts that I listen to on a daily basis. And all I'm going to do here, I've got my phone out. I got my podcast catcher. I've got an iPhone. I'm not rich. It's provided to me. You know what? Why am I even getting into it? Anyway, I'm on my podcasting thing here on my phone, and I'm just going to go through the shows I listen to every day, and I'm going to go through them alphabetically. This is not like a top 5. I'm not choosing these in order of how much I like them. This is just all about the alphabet. Today's episode is brought to you by the ABCs. Use them in life, because they're useful. So the first podcast I have here in my list that I listen to, I'm not going to include shows that are no longer producing. All right. I got a couple of those here that no longer produce episodes, so I'm not going to be talking about those. Well, maybe I will. Might as well. You know what? Because there's some that I really enjoy that are just on hiatus, so I'll talk about those as well. All right. So the first one is called Alternate Reality. It's a comic book podcast, and the hosts are John and Charlie. This one's currently on hiatus due to medical issues, but it's just a couple of dudes that talk comics, and I really quite enjoy it. There's not really a lot to say about it. I think the hosts, obviously these guys are friends. They have a great rapport together, if we want to go that route. But again, they're not currently creating. They're not currently producing. I think the last episode they put out was back in March. But I'm still subscribing to them because you know what? You never know. The next podcast on my list is Around Comics. This one goes way back. So does Alternate Reality, frankly. Alternate Reality was producing episodes back when I first started, or at least around the time that I started. And they're still doing it, whereas I quit a couple of years in and then came back. Around Comics is one of those OG comic book podcasts. They were one of the first ones that I would listen to back in the day, 13, 14 years ago or so. And you've got Brian Salazar, Christopher Niesman, and Tom Caters. Now, when the show originally was produced, all three of these dudes lived in Chicago, and they would go into this comic book store every week, and they would sit down and they'd record the episode. And it was pretty awesome. Well, they stopped doing it, and they recently came back, like me, and they started podcasting again. But now they live in different areas of the country, so they do it over Skype. And they're only released once a month, but they're still really fun. These guys obviously really like each other. They obviously get along, or they wouldn't be doing this. I think the thing I like about this show now, because it has changed quite a bit, none of them, or at least Tom and Sal, don't seem to be really purchasing brand new books. They're not getting weekly books that I can tell. They're kind of in the same boat I am. They get a lot of their books off of Hoopla, which is a wonderful service out there. If you have a library card, find out if your library participates in the Hoopla program, because you get stuff for free digitally to borrow, which is pretty awesome. All right, the next podcast on my list is called Better Podcasting. This is currently releasing episodes once a week. This is hosted by Stephen John Drew and a guy who calls himself Stargate Pioneer. This is a show for hobby podcasters, folks out there who are podcasting for the fun of it. And this is to help make your podcast better. They have a certain topic each week that they go through, and then they talk about stuff in the industry. They talk about equipment. These guys are gearheads. That's what I refer to them as. Back in my musician days, guys who just talked about their guitars and their amps and all the little things that they could buy and purchase and tweak and modify. Gearheads. That's what these guys are. They're total gearheads. When they start talking about all the different microphones and what they can do, I kind of zone out a bit. But there's a lot of good stuff. If you're a podcaster, there's a lot of good stuff in this podcast. All right, next up on my list is a show that I think it was just a limited release because there hasn't been a new episode of this show since May. And they called it the season finale, but I haven't seen a season 2. This is an audio documentary show called Blockbuster. And it was all about Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and their kind of rise to fame over a certain period of time. Kind of starts with George Lucas, it kind of starts with Steven Spielberg really breaking big with Jaws and George Lucas and his struggles getting Star Wars made. Really good show. There's only, let me look here. There are only 6 episodes. And if I remember correctly, these suckers are about a half hour long. They're fully produced. They have voice actors that play the parts of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola and all those guys that were around at the time. It's a really, really entertaining and informative podcast. And like I said, I think they're done. I think they told the story they were going to tell, and I don't know if they're ever going to do any more. But those 6 episodes are worth a listen. Next on my list is Comic Book Savant. The host of this show is a dude named James. He actually started podcasting the very same month I did 13 years ago in August. The difference between him and I is that he's still going. He didn't stop. So he's up there. Let's see. He just released on last Tuesday. I'm not sure what day of the week you're going to get this. On October 15th, as I'm recording this, his last episode was on October 15th. So if it's more than a week, if I don't put this out for a couple of weeks, which is possible, opening the curtain a little, folks, he does an episode every week, and this is episode 449. 449 episodes is what he's produced so far. He also has a YouTube channel, and if you're, I haven't said it yet, but you could probably tell by the name, he talks about comics. And the tagline for the show is the podcast for the serious comic book fan. And it's not, it almost, I don't want you to think that, this is a snobby podcast. Only serious comic book fans can listen to this. That's not the case. It just means that he's really into comics. That's what it means. And I really enjoy it. I think it's a great show. I enjoy it quite a bit. Next on the list is Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. I don't watch the Conan O'Brien show. I'm not up that late. Plus, we don't get cable, so I don't get that channel. When he used to do his show on CBS and NBC and CBS, wherever the heck he was, I still didn't watch it because I didn't stay up that late, but I would catch it. They used to play the reruns the next day on Comedy Central like 15 years ago, 15, 16, 17 years ago. And we would catch the reruns the next day on Comedy Central, and I just fell in love with him. But because he does this show on TNT now and I can't watch it, I don't really follow him anymore. But this podcast came out and I gave it a listen. He's on his 2nd season so far, and it's just him sitting down with somebody else in the industry. His latest episode that I listened to is him and Tina Fey. He's joined each week by his personal assistant, Sona Movsesian, and his producer, Matt Gorley. And just the 3 of them sometimes in the room talking is very, very funny. The next up is another big celebrity podcast. David Tennant does a podcast with. And I don't know if there's ever going to be any more episodes of this. He did, I don't know how many episodes. It was, it was a handful of episodes. The last one came out on May 20th. And he talked to, it was basically as each time you would have somebody come on, there was a connection between him and that other person. So he had an episode with Olivia Colman, who was in Broadchurch with him. He did an episode with Jodie Whittaker, who's the new Doctor Who, also in Broadchurch with him. He did an episode with John Hamm, who was in Good Omens with him. He's just, a lot of people. Tina Fey, Michael Sheen, Samantha B., James Gordon. He's talked to a number of folks, and his is a really good show. But again, I don't know if there's going to be any more podcasts being released from him. Next up is Ear Biscuits with Rhett and Link. I'm a big fan of Good Mythical Morning. And in fact, Good Mythical Morning kind of inspired me to go ahead and start doing Just Another Fanboy 5 days a week. I mean, I figured they do it, I could do it. They're a little more highly produced than I am. Obviously, they're they do this for a living, but it's kind of what, I don't know, it's kind of what inspired me. And this is so they do a video show on YouTube called Good Mythical Morning, which is about 10 to 15 minutes every day, 5 days a week. And it started off with just the two of them sitting at a table, and they would talk. And it would be something on, like a crazy news story or whatever. They, just little things that they would talk about. It's since evolved after 1,600 episodes into them playing games and eating weird food. It's quite the different show than it was when it first started. Ear Biscuits started as a podcast where they would have guests on. They would talk to them for a little bit, and then the three of them would write a song together, and then they would perform the song at the end of the podcast. I listened to it for a little while, and I kind of got sick of that. It didn't appeal to me at all, so I stopped. And just recently, I went back to see what was going on with the old Ear Biscuits and found out it's just morphed into a straight-up podcast. Episodes are about, let's see here. Episodes are about an hour long. They come out once a week. And it's just the two of them sitting at a table just talking. The one thing that they do on the podcast that they don't do on YouTube is they allow themselves to curse. They've kind of had the same rule that I've had, no swearing when it comes to their video show. But with Ear Biscuits, they made a choice that they were going to curse. But the funny thing is they don't really do it all that often. And I remember at one point, one of them saying something that was very close to a swear. And the other one said, we're allowed to swear on this show. This is what we've made that choice. And he said, I know I've gone so long not swearing, trying not to swear, that I've kind of trained myself not to swear. Next up is the Geologic podcast with George Hrab. This was a podcast I stumbled upon not that long ago. I was quite shocked that the guy has been podcasting because he's done over 600 shows. And he is a guy that when I first started doing Just Another Fanboy way back 13 years ago, some of the other podcasts that I would listen to, they would do episodes every once in a while that's like, hey, if you want to start your own podcast, do this, do that, But a lot of shows would talk about their music and how they got their music off of a site that's no longer around called the PodSafe Pod Show Music Network, where musicians and bands would submit their songs to be used on podcasts royalty free. All you had to do was include something in the episode to say the music from this show comes from the Pod Show PodSafe Music Network, blah, 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 blah. Well, a number of the songs that I ended up using were from this guy named George Hrab. And a few episodes in, because you would also, if you use somebody's song, you could tag that on the website. You could put your episode link in, attach it to that song. So I guess the artist could see that you're using their song and what show you're using their song in, what episode you're using their song on. And apparently he went and gave my show a listen because a few episodes in, I suddenly get this email from him, and he had recorded just a little. It's like, I'm George Hrab, and when I'm not blah, 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 I listen to the Just Another Fanboy. And it was this neat little thing. He did kind of a little skit. I think he said, when I'm not at home messing around with my home liposuction kit, and then he made these funny noises as if he was suctioning fat from his body. And so I always thought, this is like one of the coolest guys I know. His music is awesome, and he took the time to record this, not knowing he was doing his own podcast at the time. Had no clue. Well, I jumped upon it lately, and I started listening to it probably in the last year. It's a very entertaining podcast. He does, every once in a while, he'll do sketches. He has certain segments. He was kind of the inspiration behind Stephen or Else. He does different segments. He has like a, I don't know the word I'm looking for. He has a corral of segments. He has like a bucket load of segments that he just rotates in and out. So he might do one segment, maybe in one episode, but may not be in the other one. I'll be honest with you. If you are a religious person, you're not going to enjoy his show. He is a staunch atheist. I'm not a religious person, but I'm also not an atheist. I can admit that I believe. I'm a believer, but I don't go to church. You know, you get some of these folks. You can get it on either end. You can get people who try to drag you into the church, and you get people who try to drag you out of the church. He's not one of these people that will try to drag you out of a church. But the only reason I mention it is because he does a segment, and it's practically on every single episode, called the Religious Moron of the Week. And being a believer, I happen to find it one of the funniest segments I've ever listened to, because I think it's a good thing to point out the people that are making the stuff you believe look bad. I don't think that I think some folks would listen to his Religious Moron of the Week and go, oh, he's making fun of the church. He's making fun of me because I believe in God. But no, to me, he's pointing out people that are hypocrites. He's pointing out hypocrisy, and I'm a big fan of that, pointing out hypocrisy. Well, I'm not quite through my list of podcasts at this point, but we're getting close to over 15 minutes, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'm going to wrap this up. We'll come back later in a couple of weeks, and we'll do another episode in which I go over the other podcasts that I listen to, and maybe some new podcasts will have been added, because one of the things I want to do here is invite folks. If you're listening to this and you do a podcast and you didn't hear your podcast named, or you listen to a podcast that you didn't hear me name, remember, I'm doing it alphabetically. So if one of the podcasts you want to recommend starts with the letter P, I haven't gotten to the letter P yet, okay? But if you want to throw a podcast my way that you feel I should listen to, you can send that to feedback@stevenorelse.com and just put in the subject line, podcast recommendation, or something similar. And I'll give it a listen, and maybe it'll be included in the next episode. All right? So until next time, that's it. That's all I got. My name is Steven, and I'm just another fanboy. Be nice to each other. Just Another Fanboy is a presentation of the Steven or Else podcast. Questions and comments can be directed to feedback@stevenorelse.com. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/StevenRor and get instant access to the My Other Podcast, a weekly show about whatever crawls its way into my tiny little mind just moments before I tap record. You can find me on the World Wide Web at stevenorelse.com, or find me on Twitter and Instagram by searching for @StevenOrElse. I also encourage you to subscribe to the show, leave us a 5-star review, and share this episode with a friend. Just Another Fanboy is a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. You can find that over at comicspodcasts.com. All links will be in the show notes.
Bye-bye, Daddy. Bye-bye, Daddy.
Good job.